Hi, my name is James Mulvaney. I'm founder of matchmaker.fm, a service which will connect amazing podcasters with high-profile guests. In this video, I want to give you 10 tips or pieces of advice on how to maximize every single podcast interview that you're doing. It doesn't matter if it's the first podcast interview you've done or if you've done a few interviews in the past, but perhaps maybe you're not feeling 100% confident. I want to give you the ideas and the guidance to make sure that you're becoming absolutely ace in every single podcast that you do. So let's dive into a presentation that I made for you. To today's session on the learning series, how to ace every single interview. Firstly, I recommend every single time you speak to the host of the podcast or the presenter before you actually get into the recording. And I can't stress this enough. It's really important that you kind of build a bit of a rapport with them. So perhaps that they're on the other side of the world, and that doesn't matter so much because, with things like Google Hangouts or Zoom, you can webcam with them, you can chat, and you can kind of get to know the person a little bit before you actually get into the recording. Now, this doesn't have to be at a separate time, but I recommend trying to speak to them before you actually hit that record button or before they hit that record button for at least maybe half an hour. Run through, your backstory, tell them a bit about yourself, find out a bit about them, get to know that person. But ultimately, you want to have that natural rapport with someone. The next tip is don't go into an interview with all guns blazing. What I mean by this is there's a lot of people who will go in and they have a spiel that they've pre-prepared and they'll kind of just go through the standard stuff and quite often they won't let the interviewer get a word in edgeways. Ultimately, I think the best podcasts are the ones that are genuine conversations between two people. So allow the person who is conducting the interview, the person whose podcast it is, to ask you questions and give them time to introduce you, give them time to, lead the conversation. But ultimately, respect that it's their show at the end of the day. Yes, you may have a book to promote or a website or a service you've just launched and you want to promote that. That's fine. You can do that at the end generally, and a good interviewer will give you an opportunity to do that. But don't be too pushy and make sure that the conversation is interesting and informed between both parties. And ultimately, you'll then have a win-win situation. If you're promoting something, fair enough, you'll get your chance to do that. But ultimately, allow the podcaster to tell their story, allow them to, form the episode as the way they want it to be formed versus just kind of going in there and throwing a million words at them from the get-go. Next up, think about what they want to achieve. What is the reason the podcaster has asked you onto their podcast in the first place? Do they want to draw on a specific set of skills that you have? Do they want to draw on your knowledge of a specific area? Or do they just want to chat to you about something interesting that you've done or you've achieved? Try and think about the goal of the podcaster, why they've got you on. And again, you can ask them these questions in advance. You want to make sure each interview you give, you're delivering as much value to the listener as possible. Remember, there's going to be an audience listening to this. But ultimately, what is your purpose in that podcast interview? The great thing about a platform like matchmaker.fm is it allows you to book a lot of podcast interviews very quickly as a guest. Or if you're a podcaster, it allows you to hook up with lots of different guests. I say hook up, that kind of sounds like a dating service. Matchmaker kind of is like dating for podcasters. In fact, we bill it as Tinder for podcasters. But what I'm saying is each time you get booked onto a podcast, great. Some people will ultimately have the sort of backstory to their career, etc., which is fine. However, if you get booked on 10 podcasts and you're giving the same sort of backstory each time, it can become a little bit repetitive, not only for you as a guest, but ultimately for listeners, because quite often you've got to remember people will be listening to similar podcasts. If you work in a certain industry, they might hear you again and again. You want to basically make each appearance different. And you want to make sure that you tailor what you're saying to that podcast versus just giving a generic blurb. Again, it's fine if you're promoting something or if you're trying to build your profile. I understand that. But for God's sake, just try and be original on each podcast appearance that you get. And it will pay off dividends to you as well, because listeners will become more aware of you and they'll become more aware of different stories that you have to tell. And ultimately, that will help grow your bond with the audience, as well as making it more of an interesting experience for yourself by being featured on different podcasts. Level up your audio. Now, I say this to everybody I speak to who wants to get involved in podcasting one way or another. Doesn't matter if you're starting your own podcast or if you're appearing on other people's podcasts as a guest. There is nothing more frustrating than when you're in a big echoey room and you're connected to them through your laptop microphone or your desktop, whatever. What you want to do is invest in a good quality microphone. You can get them, they plug into your USB port, and it will give you audio that sounds 10 times better than the built-in device within your computer. This is an investment you need to make. If you can buy a more expensive microphone, perhaps you can go and buy something like this, which is a lot of money, to be fair, which sounds amazing, even better. But for most people, a good quality USB microphone, $20 to $50, maybe even $100 if you've got some money to spend. The results will be tenfold based on your sort of standard built-in computer audio, which is never going to be good. Don't use your phone, don't use your computer, go out and buy a decent microphone. Level up your audio. You'll thank me for it. Listeners will definitely thank you for it as well. So when you're going into the interview, I think it's always good to have some notes written down, even as you're being the guest. If there's key points that you want to cover, and again, this goes back to when I said make each interview original and different. I think having a set of notes that you can refer to so you can make sure that you're not forgetting things. I've been guilty of this. You think, right, I'm going to mention this, this, and this, and this. You get into the conversation and you forget to mention 3 out of the 5 things that you were going to. So just have a set of bullet points in front of you that are key issues you want to address, key points you want to make, or sort of, parts of the story that you think are relevant to this discussion. It will make a more interesting conversation. And ultimately, if you're new to this and you're not a confident speaker, having notes in front of you will just help you kind of fill in the gaps almost. Because I think, again, if you're not used to speaking to someone in this kind of nature, to begin with, it can be a little bit weird. It can be a little bit uncomfortable. So having some notes will just help you along and kind of keep the conversation going. Plus also as well, if you're running out of things to say, it's always good to have some stuff to fall back on as well. So get some notes written down and, try and be as prepared as you can for each interview. Silence in the room. So this is really important. You need to try and get a good room to record in. Now, not everyone has a soundproof studio, so think about the environment you're actually recording podcasts in. Is there a big echo? Is there lots of hard surfaces that audio is going to bounce off and it's going to sound awful? If there is, you can do things like, hang up some sheets or, go into a room where there's lots of soft furnishings, and it'll just help dampen down the sound a bit. The next thing, get yourself prepared for the interview. Have you got a glass of water beside you? Have you told the kids that you're recording a podcast and mummy or daddy needs you to be quiet just for half an hour whilst I do this? Have you switched your phone onto silent? There's nothing worse than someone's phone going off when you're trying to interview them, and then you have to record again. And ultimately, you need to respect the person who's doing the interview's time and make sure you're as prepared as possible for the interview. And finally, if you have pets, if you've got noise going on outside, shut the windows, get the pets in another room, etc. Just make sure that you're fully prepared and you're going to give it your 110% for the length of that interview, and there's not going to be kind of any outside distractions. Treat it like you're doing it live. Most podcasts are not live. Most of them are pre-recorded. So if you make a mistake, you don't have to worry too much, because the chances are the person who's recording the podcast will have experienced guests making mistakes or mumbling their words or forgetting what they were going to say. So they'll just edit that stuff out. That's the beauty of podcasting, but try and be as prepared as you can. All right, next up, bring it the energy. I think when you're on camera or when you're recording into a microphone, you kind of need to be 10 times the person that you normally are. And trust me, this comes across not as kind of cheesy or over the top. And I think there's a difference between having good energy in your kind of voice and bringing the passion to the table and just sort of being over the top or showy offy. But make sure that you're enthusiastic. No one wants to listen to a podcast where someone's just speaking in monotone for an hour. So Make sure that you're bringing a passion and you're being this enthusiastic, put a smile on your face. It will come across down the microphone and listeners will be able to tell the difference if you're energetic and upbeat than someone who's kind of boring and too serious. And ultimately, you're not on a news broadcast. You can be yourself. You don't have to speak all formally. Keep it conversational, but bring the energy, and it will pay off and help your listeners really engage with you as well. Finally, when you're done recording, remember to say thank you to the podcaster who's actually interviewing you. Ultimately, they've given up their time. They are promoting you on their show. It's great publicity as well. It will expose you to a new audience. So remember to say thanks for having me on. You can do that on the podcast or you can do that after you finish recording, but just remember to say thank you. Spread the love. So when podcasters have got your episode and it's ready for distribution, they will normally contact you beforehand and they might give you a certain set of instructions like, please, can you share this on Twitter or can you push it out to your LinkedIn profile or your Facebook page? Sometimes they'll send you various different social media assets. So there might be images or video clips. But ultimately, if they've taken the time to sort of record and edit and interview you for their podcast, you can return the favor by pushing their podcast out to your network as well. It's a two-way thing. They'll benefit, of course, by your audience being aware of this episode and therefore their podcast. They've exposed you to their audience as well. So remember to sort of return the favor, spread the love and assist them as much as you can. And then finally, remember, podcasters love reviews. So if you've got 5 minutes, head on to the iTunes store and just write a quick review on their podcast. It will mean a lot to them and ultimately it will help them climb the rankings, which will ultimately help you get more exposure because the episode that you've been featured on will appear higher up on the search results on Apple Podcasts, etc. So go and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. They'll really thank you for it. Podcasters love reviews. So there we have it, 10 different tips to help you ace every single podcast interview that you're booked on as a guest. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got any questions or any additional tips that you think would be beneficial to people, please put them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And also as well, if you've had great success using Matchmaker and getting booked in as a guest, please tell us in the comments below. We'd love to see what you've been doing and what you guys have been up to. Thanks very much for watching this video and I'll speak to you soon. Bye for now.